So hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of ARBinBRIEF. My name is Emily. I'm a member of the ARBinBRIEF team and I work at 𝗔𝗏𝗕𝗏 and Vandenberg. I have the pleasure of moderating today's episode. And just first, before we get started, a few words about ARBinBRIEF. We offer a practical video guide on hand-picked arbitration issues and we showcase talented arbitrators. ARBinBRIEF is produced in collaboration with Delos Dispute Resolution and with Arbitration Pledge, and Season 2 is sponsored by LaLeaf. So today we're going to be talking about tribunal dynamics, and I'm joined for this discussion with Elena Gutiérrez García de Cortázar from Guatemala and Spain, who is a founding partner with MGC Arbitration. She's based in Madrid and Paris. And I have with me Shan Greer, who's from St. Lucia, and she's an independent arbitrator with Arbitra International based in the Caribbean. Thank you so much, Shan and Elena, for joining us. So I'm going to start off with a question to Shan. Shan, as chair, how do you ensure that your co-arbitrators feel heard and are heard during the course of the proceedings?
Thanks, Emily. It's a pleasure to be here and to participate in ARBinBRIEF. I know I don't want to state the obvious, but I think if you want to ensure that your co-arbitrators are heard and feel heard, then you have to actually listen to them. And I think as obvious as that may sound, it's an easy step to miss. So at the start of the proceedings, I always meet with my co-arbitrators and try to have an open discussion with them as to how they believe the proceeding should be administered and how decisions should be made. And during these discussions, I avoid talking too much. And it is tempting, and the reason I say it's because it is tempting at the onset to want to impress everyone with your brilliance. But I think in the early stages, what your co-arbitrators really want to know is that they're going to have an opportunity to make a valuable contribution, as opposed to appreciating how smart you are. So when you're listening, the benefit of listening is you can find common ground and appear to be granting concessions without actually doing so. And when both parties feel that they're heard early on, that builds a sense of trust. And then once you have their trust, they're more likely to be receptive to listening to you and understanding your point of view later on. When it comes to decision making, I find it's helpful to check in with my co-arbitrators throughout the process. So for example, after the submission of statements of case, it's useful to have a sense of what they think the issues are based on what has been submitted in those. I think it's also useful to continue to have those discussions to sort of talk about things like whether there are gaps in the evidence, how witnesses did during cross-examination. And the idea is not to make decisions during these discussions, but rather to get onto the same page as to what needs to be decided and the bar that needs to be met to make those decisions. And I find that if you're constantly working towards being on the same page throughout the process, even if you don't necessarily agree on the outcome, you can agree as to what you're arguing about, and that makes it easier to get on the same page.
Great, thank you, Shan. And now over to you, Elena. Do you see cultural factors playing a role in your tribunal dynamics? And if so, how does this impact the way that you approach deliberations?
Thank you, Emily. I'm thrilled to be here with you today. Well, in my opinion, being an arbitrator has a lot to do with truth-seeking and fact-finding. And experience has taught me that cultural baselines indeed affect such efforts. I have seen the same set of facts being perceived very differently depending on the arbitrator's cultural background, just like the perception of spicy food may mean something entirely different to someone from Mexico or India than to someone coming from Italy or Guatemala or Nigeria. So when we arbitrators make decisions, we actually do not only use our professional knowledge, but we also use our knowledge about the world, which is normally referred to as common sense. I believe that common sense is certainly influenced by the cultural and social upbringing of an arbitrator. So yes, in my experience, cultural factors play a role in the tribunal dynamics, but it's not only about assessing evidence, it is also affecting the internal relationships between arbitrators and the way harmony is actually achieved in a tribunal. Harmony, which I think, truly think, it's key for a successful arbitration. I've had the privilege of arbitrating with practitioners of as many as 21 nationalities. I've counted them for the sake of this webinar, and I can tell you that culture affects the dynamics of an arbitration. When I am more in a Central European tribunal, things work very differently than when I sit with Latinos, for instance. The importance of small talk, the importance of informal deliberations, the use of sense of humor, the amount of times you have to go to dinner with the arbitrators when sitting at hearings, the amount of smiling that takes place at the hearing room, the way, formal or informal, you relate to the parties, it actually is very different. Now, do not get me wrong. It will be absurd to raise a determinism of the conduct of an arbitration by reason of a nationality. I am actually called the German back home. I know Brazilians that hate samba and are awful at a dance floor. And my Japanese friend Ikuko can dance flamenco in a way I have never seen any of my born and raised Spaniard friends do. But I do think we have to acknowledge that culture may set up some patterns that need to be taken into account and actually makes my job much, much more interesting. So I'm actually very grateful for those to happen.
Interesting. Thank you, Elena. And speaking of cultural differences, Shan, do you think a more diverse tribunal produces better results?
I think the issue of diversity is always a challenging and emotive one. And as an Afro-Caribbean Canadian woman who by arbitration standards is considered young, I've had several unpleasant professional experiences and struggled to carve a place out for myself in the market. Now, having had these experiences, it's really tempting for me to approach this question emotionally. And trust me, I'm fairly certain I have the skill sets to get on a soapbox and convince everybody why choosing brown people or women is a good idea. I'm not going to do that, however, because I think ultimately arbitration is a business and it's about our community making money and our saving our clients money. So instead, I'm going to give a commercial justification for diversity. I think we can accept that we in the arbitration community will only make money if our clients see value in the services that we provide. And the services we provide will only demonstrate value if it improves and develops with the changing times. Research has shown time and time again that competition increases motivation and improves productivity as well as performance. And when we limit the pool of arbitrators, sorry to say, to pale and stale men, we limit competition. New methods of analyzing disputes and the use of technology are all important to the growth of our profession. And arbitrators will not be driven to innovate and improve if they don't feel forced to do so to keep their market share. So simply put, in my opinion, even if you're a person who doesn't feel emotionally or morally moved to include diverse persons on panels, you should want to do so because it makes good commercial sense, both for your bottom line and that of your clients.
That's a really interesting spin on things. Thank you, Shan. Now back to you, Elena. In your experience, how do tribunal dynamics differ when deliberations are held online versus in person? And do you think this is a good thing or not?
Well, I think that when pandemic forced us to think differently and towards the use of available technology, we understood that the virtual world was not that different for the sake of conducting an arbitration that we had in an in-person reality. I know you say that it's just not the same. Well, when it comes to deliberating and the tribunal dynamics in a virtual world, it's just not the same, but it's pretty similar. I don't think it has to do that much with the deliberations per se, because they actually occurred before the pandemic. They were quite often that we deliberated virtually, and I particularly, and all of the people who, as myself, tend to be very expressive, see some advantages in the possibility, the beauty of turning your camera off when your body is actually expressing utter disagreement with a particular view of a particular arbitration. You cannot make yourself invisible when you're in the actual same room with that particular arbitrator. You can when you're virtually, but it's not that much about the actual deliberation, but I think it's having or not having sat together throughout a hearing. And I just finished 3 cases in this past month that were fully conducted virtually, and the dynamics were very, very differently. In one of them, all of the tribunal members knew each other beforehand. I have to say the dynamics were not that different. Of course, we missed the informal deliberation. And it was a Latino tribunal, which makes it even more important, the personal touch. But it would have worked anyway. The second one, I chaired a tribunal in which I didn't know beforehand any of the co-arbitrators, and they didn't know each other. And I have to say that virtuality played against me as a chair, because it prevented me to achieve so easily the harmony I do believe needs to exist for the well-being of an arbitrator. It took away from me some of my tricks or my toolkit that the in-person hearing would have done in order to smoothen tense deliberations, tense situations in general, or disagreements. So in that aspect, I did take a hit for the sake of virtuality. The third case, I, as a co-arbitrator, knew the chair, the other co-arbitrator didn't. I personally think it did have an impact on the influence I could have with the chair than the other one did not, because he could not bond with the chair throughout hearings, and I had my bonding made beforehand.
Interesting, thank you. We're going to have a question now about the Delos rules. So Shan, I'm going to start with you first. Under the Delos rules, Delos issues a time notice, and this is a notice within which the tribunal has to submit its draft of the first award in the proceedings to Delos for review. That's in Article 14.4. So this time notice is issued before the tribunal has even set the procedural timetable in the case. Whereas in some other institutions, they set a time limit for submission of a draft award at the close of the proceedings, or they track time only once the hearing or the last submissions have taken place. So in your experience, how do these different approaches impact how a tribunal manages deadlines, plans its own time, and do you think these are a useful tool for increasing the efficiency of the proceedings?
You know, when we promote arbitrations, one of the advantages that we frequently tout as one of the best things about arbitration, other than enforceability, is that it gives the parties the flexibility to tailor the procedural process to their dispute. But you know what the worst thing about arbitration is that it gives the parties that flexibility to be able to tailor the process to their dispute. And I think at the contractual stage, when parties are negotiating, they are deciding how they want to resolve their disputes based on what they believe are the type of disputes that are likely to occur. But lawyers and their parties aren't fortune tellers, and sometimes disputes will arise which were not anticipated or in a manner not initially expected. Also, disputes evolve, parties' objectives change, and disputes can be affected by third external factors, for example, like a global pandemic. And so while in principle, I welcome rules which seek to reduce the time and cost associated with arbitration, I also appreciate that they must include sufficient room and provide powers which allow the arbitrators to facilitate both parties presenting their case. We have to remember that at the end of the day, we don't want a quick and cheap process if it's going to result in a bad quality decision, particularly since in most jurisdictions, there's a limited right to appeal. Now, I must confess, I have not used the Delos rules, but I have looked at the clause, and I think it achieves the right balance. It provides accountability by setting time limits which facilitate the progression of the arbitration, but then makes space for flexibility by allowing those time limits to be extended if necessary. And of course, different parties will have different needs. And I think if you are a party who wants to prioritize speed, but without compromising the quality of decision, this may be a set of rules which would achieve that for you.
Elena, what are your thoughts about this time notice?
Well, I do share many of Shan's thoughts, actually, and especially that, I mean, after having sat in more than 50 arbitration tribunals, I come to acknowledge that arbitrations are in fact living creatures and that they evolve constantly, and we as arbitrators need to adapt, or the arbitration rules that are governing need to adapt to those changes. So in order not to repeat what's been said before, I think that the idea behind any deadline or to render an award to the arbitrators, which is a good idea in order to make tribunals subject to deadlines and avoid unnecessary delays. I think they have to take into account a big primary principle for me, that is that arbitration should last as long as the parties want them to last, and not much longer. And we have to find a balance or a system which allows that, which makes tribunals subject to deadlines, but we should move away or avoid prefixed and unmovable dates that are not sensitive to the actual biology of an arbitration. And I think that is that is completed not only with the possibility of extensions, but maybe with other systems in which the time to render an award is more stuck to the actual happening of the events in a particular arbitration.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shan and Elena, for this excellent discussion. We also want to thank our partner organizations, Delos and ARBinBRIEF Pledge, and all the organizations that kindly supported this episode. Delos Dispute Resolution is an independent arbitral institution established in 2014, and ARBinBRIEF Pledge establishes concrete and actionable steps to increase the number of women appointed as arbitrators with the ultimate goal of full parity. The sponsor for our second season is 𝗔𝗕𝗏, which is an international law firm with offices in Geneva, Zurich, and London, renowned for its expertise and experience in dispute resolution. And to see future episodes of ARBinBRIEF on handpicked arbitration issues, please follow us on LinkedIn and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'd love to hear your comments and feedback, and you can register for our next episode on www.arbinbrief.com. We look forward to seeing you there.